working on the budget. I do have to say that yesterday I made a procedural mistake where I did not have a vote when we actually had the motion in regards to opening up discussion on, I believe, House Bill 2208. Is that correct, Jill? And so in my haste, I just went ahead and moved on, but the motion was made by Representative Hoffman, seconded by Representative Helgerson. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, now discussion. Oh, 2273? Okay. We'll make the correction in the minutes for 2273. All right, now we can have discussion in regards to House Bill 2273. Yes. So, Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we remove the contents of House Bill 2278 and insert the contents of House Bill, it should be 2273, right? Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah. I move that we remove the contents of House Bill 2273 and insert the contents of House Bill 2802 as amended to include the House Appropriations Committee actions and then subject to further amendments.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Helgerson. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative Hoffman, you may close.
I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes. Any further discussion? There's got to be discussion. Representative Mason.
Just so I'm clear, we're on the budget, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had a couple motions made a week ago to move a couple items from my specific subcommittee to omnibus consideration, and I would like to review those and possibly move them for current consideration.
All right, proceed on the first item.
Okay, so on the KDHE budget, the original motion was to add $2 million all SGF to increase the availability of early intervention services provided through the infant and toddler program, parenthetical notation, tiny k for fiscal year 2025. My motion is to consider this item now to change the funding from SGF to Children's Cabinet, and upon approval be included in the KDHE health budget.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Ballard. Discussion on the motion. Seeing Representative Helgerson.
Could you restate that again?
Representative Mason.
Restate my new motion?
Yes.
Okay, so the motion would be essentially to add $2 million from the Children's Cabinet to increase the availability of early intervention services provided through the infant and toddler program, or Tiny K, for fiscal year 2025.
And
Representative Helgerson.
what's the balance in there now?
Representative Mason.
I do not know the balance.
Are there funds available? Let me ask that.
In
Or have
the
they already
children-
been committed?
In the Children's Cabinet?
Yes.
Again, I don't know the answer. Can we get that from research? Can you?
Actually, the balance amount was in your packet that was laid out on your place setting this morning from the Children's Initiative Fund. And the item that Representative Mason is referring to is actually on your goldenrod sheet. Haven't used that term in a long time. Number 15 is the item that was supposed to be considered at omnibus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Mason.
This is what I'm told, is that there is no balance. We zero it out yearly, but as we make these appropriations, then those transfers are made.
Representative Helgerson.
Yeah, I don't have any problem. My only discussion that I've had with individuals was there was a large surplus that was committed, but it was in the process of they collected on a monthly basis as opposed to all at one time. So we can look at it further in conference committee then.
Representative Mason.
I would say that's the appropriate action. The Senate did put the extra $2 million in, all SGF. This would at least give the House a position.
Any further discussion in regard to Representative Mason's motion? Seeing none, Representative Mason.
I'll renew my motion, Mr. Chairman.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me change notebooks here. I'm going to go to KDHE. If you'll bear with me one moment. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The original motion on this one was to add $60.9 million, including $23.4 million SGF in one-time funding to continue the Medicaid add-on payment to nursing facilities based on the number of Medicaid patients served for fiscal year 25 only. And so my motion now is to consider this item now, and upon approval, it be included in the KADS budget as originally stated.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Ballard. Discussion on the motion.
Oh. We have it listed.
Representative Kincannon. Representative Mason.
I'm told it's already in the budget. This was just a request for additional information, but yet it showed up on our sheet here. So I'm conflicted.
This would be item 11 on, again, the goldenrod sheet on the items to consider in omnibus. Correct?
Correct.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative Mason.
I will renew my motion, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those were the two I wanted to remove from omnibus for consideration. We do have some other items on the list if you want to go through them one by one, or I can let others take turns.
You have the floor, so go through them one by one.
All right. Let me get organized here, please.
First one be
Okay. May I yield to Representative Ballard for that item number 3 on the consideration prior to finalization regarding Ember Hope.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For Ember Hope, we were talking about one-time funding for aftercare services for PRTF. And for those of you who may not know what we're talking about for that, that would be our psychiatric residential treatment facility. And as a result of that, the $500,000 that we're asking for is really based on aftercare. And part of the aftercare is a strong family engagement and parental involvement. And when we have youth, and it's really children and adolescents, part of what we look at is when they're released from PRTF, that we do a 6-month follow-up, and part of that follow-up is weekly the first month, and then bi-weekly for the remaining time, and that's to see what their progress is and how they're doing. $200,000 of this $500,000 will go towards their cottages and their family visitation center. And part of that is families may come as far as 150 miles away. They can spend a night or a weekend on those premises in the cottages to visit, have frequent contact with their children, and whatever else is needed at that time. This cottage allowed some people to come to spend Christmas with them. They also work on foster care, adoptive care, and other areas as well. That $200,000, as I said, would be to continue the cost of the Family Visitation Center and make that possible. We know that the youth don't have as many beds sometimes that we need, and sometimes there's a waiting list. And it's important that we get to them early in order to deal with whatever traumas they have, but at the same time, try to keep families together as well. So that program is valuable, and we have some that's for just female youth, because that seems to be where the waiting list might be, and a combination. So I would ask that we appropriate these funds because of the needed, but the aftercare. And we have, I think, an obligation in a way to make sure that we save these young people and keep them together in their families and keep them out of trouble and help with their mental stability as well.
Do you have a motion?
Oh, I move that we appropriate, the $500,000.
All right. Your committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Mason. Discussion on the motion, Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is really just maybe a refreshing of my memory. But as we went through the KDAD's budget, I thought that items 3 and 4 were passed over and they were included in the budget. Am I remembering this incorrectly?
Representative Ballard.
It's a yes and a no answer in a way when it's already in the budget. What they're,
On the sheet, it's already funded. All of these are funded. They requested additional information.
oh, that's a pleasant surprise to me.
Representative Ballard.
I thought we said we were going to, we requested additional information, but I was thinking they'd put a hold on it. So I just wanted to, I'm providing the additional information then that was needed.
So you need to restate your motion.
Pardon me?
Restate your motion.
I will restate the motion that we, well, it's already there.
Restate or resend?
Resend,
Rescind.
resend it, because I put, and he'll resend the second.
All right. So the motion has been withdrawn. Dylan.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I thought it might be helpful if I just walk through some of the documents that you have before you. We've also made a couple of small modifications to some of these documents, hopefully to make it clearer what the current funded status on some of these requests for information are. Before I go into the actual discussion of the documents you have before you, if you look behind you, you'll see a taupe book and a green book. Those are your budget analyses. So if you want to know, if we're starting to talk about KDADS and you want to pull out your KDADS BA, they are there for your review. We have attempted to provide those individuals who preferred the side-by-side with a side-by-side review of those documents. So I'm not going to go over these documents in length. I think the committee can do that, but I just wanted to point out what it is you have before you. So your front cover page, okay? What this is just the first 4 pages of the budget analysis. Stephen Wu and Megan Leopold did great work sort of summarizing what is in the governor's recommendation. On the very back page, what you have is a profile that just shows kind of where you stand, okay, and what your balances are going forward. The next item is the brown sheet. And the brown sheet is items for review prior to finalization. This is HB 2802, okay, and these are things that you said you wanted to review before you kicked it out of committee. Some of this stuff is already in the budget, and you were just requesting additional information. Some of this stuff was deleted, and some of this stuff was never in the budget in the first place, but you said you wanted to review this and get some additional information before you went ahead and finalized the House recommendation. So in this column that says funded in HB 2802, if that says funded, okay, that indicates that funding is currently in the bill for that item and is just a point for consideration or communications. There's also a goldenrod sheet, and this is for your informational purposes only. This is items to be reviewed at omnibus. This is actually for like 6 weeks from now. We just want to give you a heads up. If you didn't see something on the brown sheet, hey, probably on the goldenrod sheet. This is the green sheet, and the green sheet is the shorthand. Okay, and this is all of your changes from the governor's recommendation is what's included here. And just to give you an idea, in fiscal year 2024, if you look at page 2, you've deleted $436.9 million SGF from the governor's recommendation. And if you look at page, all the way to the very back on page 10, you've deleted $360.9 million SGF from the fiscal year 2025 governor's recommendation. And that's the governor's recommendation as adjusted by the governor's budget amendment number 1. So if you're curious whether or not, hey, I thought we took action on this, look for your agency. It's organized by function of government, and if it's on the screen sheet, you'll see what we have recorded. If you have a question, hey, I really think we did this, come and talk to one of our analysts, and we'll get with you as you need it. The rest of these documents that you see before you are the special revenue fund tables. So you see Children's Initiatives Fund, which has already been brought up. So it's good to see it's being used. The EDIF table, which is on the green sheet, so the Economic Development Initiatives Fund. On the very vibrant orange sheet, we have the Expanded Lottery Act Revenues Fund. So those are not receipts that are coming from the sale of like scratch tickets, but really from our casinos. And the blue sheet, appropriately, is the State Water Plan Fund. So with that, I would just sort of stand for questions, but I just want to give you an idea of what the documents that are before you.
All right, committee, any questions for Dylan? Representative Owens.
Just quickly, Dylan, is there any document that shows where we're at in terms of our adjustments compared to the governor's? So where we started with the governor, where we are setting currently before making adjustments, or do I need to do some math?
Dylan.
So there's thank you. There's 2 places you can see that. So the easiest place to see it, if you just want to know how much have you cut, okay, then you can look at the shorthand, okay? And then, like I said, on page 2 of the shorthand, you can see the 2024 adjustments. And so you can see in the box in the middle, that sums up to $436.9 million, all right? But if you want to see kind of what your approved level of spending is, if you take the overview pages right here, and on the back, there's the 5-year profile that's on that, and you can see that this is as adjusted by this committee. There are some assumptions in here for ease of use. I want to clarify. This profile does not have a tax plan built into it, so it's not making any adjustments for any tax plans that are out there, neither the governor's nor any legislative tax plan. The other thing is that this includes education. So, if you delete 6.3, if we were to actually take that out and not reflect it here, it would make it very difficult to sort of review. So we're just sort of showing what the actual sort of House recommendation is overall, which does include the education budget for this purpose. And those assumptions are reflected in the footnote on the bottom.
Representative Owens.
All right, so just to be clear, on this last sheet, and I just want to make sure I understand, if we were to pass the budget without any of the recommendations made here today, this is basically what our spending would look like.
That's correct, sir.
Okay.
This is year to date, all of your recommendations. And so if you look at, and I don't want to get deep into this profile because I feel like I'm interfering with your time, but there's this HAP adjustments line, okay? So that's House Appropriations adjustment to as of March 5th.
Great, thank you.
Well, and I would say in regards to 26, 27, and 28, in regards to the profile, we probably would have the notwithstanding language that we normally have in the budget, and those items would not be included in those outlying years. Representative Helgerson.
Further clarification, if you don't mind. When we pull it out for a paying down debt or for bonding something, it may show up one way as we've reduced the budget or the expenses, and then we counteract it with our increases, which still doesn't give us a true figure of where we are financially. Is that fair? You don't have to use the word true, but that's not the same, it's apples to oranges as opposed to apples.
Dylan.
So that's correct in that in some cases the debt service, the desire to pay the debt service has already been taken out of the budget. So there was a couple debt payments are in here. But honestly, in most cases, the governor's recommendation didn't have long-term reductions because of those eliminations built in yet, because those were still being calculated. So I think it's a pretty accurate reflection of the sort of long-term trend profiles.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for Dylan? All right, seeing none, thank you for giving us a brief overview. I should have probably had you do that first before we started actually discussing items in the budget. Representative Mason.
I think
You're good?
I think we're covered. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Do what? Representative Ballard.
Excuse me, to mention the Board of Pharmacy, the position that was removed, the assistant, can we do this at this time, or do we have to wait till later? Because I would like to discuss this position.
It was removed to omnibus or just removed completely?
It was removed, it was a new position, and it was removed. But I've since discussed it with the person who removed it, and I would like to find out if this is the time now. It was the assistant director position for the Department of Pharmacy.
This is the appropriate time.
Thank you. This was a position that the Board of Pharmacy had asked for, and it was one FTE position, and it was $151,715, all from special revenue funds. And the information I'm offering for it now is it will not impact 10% of their pharmacy fees because it just won't. The volume of work for the compliance department has increased over the past 10 years. I think if we go back to the history, we funded it first, the KTRACS program and everything else, and then we asked that they start taking care of their own funding. They have written consistently annually their grants in order to do this, but the volume has increased. The position would support the director of compliance. The position must be a licensed pharmacist, and that annual salary runs between $130 and $160. They have 2,902 resident facilities that require inspection every 18 months, and 730 of those require inspection every 3 years. It was approved by the governor. The Senate has approved it as well. And this person would be going out with a junior inspector, and sometimes you have to go several times to inspect the pharmacies and make sure that they're in compliance. The KTRAC also supported that they received 431,000 patient queries per month. And this was done in 2023. So part of this position has grown over 10 years, and yet they've never had an assistant director. It has all been done by the director and the director of the compliance department. It has just grown to the point that they need more management over it, and they have worked with a smaller staff because we asked them to become self-sufficient. They've done it to that point, but now they need additional help out there. And by having this licensed person come in to oversee it, they also can step in whenever there might be a work shortage because they're familiar with the operation.
You made a motion.
I would make the motion that we fund this position.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Mason. Discussion on the motion. All right, seeing none, Representative Ballard, you may close.
Thank you very much. I close on this position for 2025.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Actually, I'm going to have a motion right now, and I just want to kind of get this out of the way. I've earlier we had discussions in regards to the World Cup, which when I've had town halls back home, that I've been saying that that's kind of been dominating the legislative session of 2024. However, with that being said, it's very difficult for me to substantiate the $28 million going to one particular portion of the state. And so that is the reason why on Tuesday we had the discussion in regards to a project that was actually brought to my attention in regards to my area of the state. And in further conversation, including with the governor, we have also, with Representative Francis, we looked at Southwest Kansas, and then Representative Hoffman has been briefed on some issues that is regarding 3 communities in South Central Kansas. And so this is going to be a conceptual package, so I apologize, Jill, that I would want to have this in complete writing. But this is going to be encompassing areas of concern for the entire state of Kansas, not just the World Cup, which is basically going to benefit the Northeast Kansas part, but as a Central Kansas and Northwest Kansas representative, I can't go home and justify spending $28 million for one particular area of the state. And so this is going to be addressing economic development for the entirety of the state of Kansas. So the first provision of that, and I will also preface that this is not state general fund. This is going to be what's remaining in regards to the American Rescue Plan Act money that the state of Kansas currently has. Right now, Dylan, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's about $76.5 million. It's also going to address some concerns in regards to the KU Wichita State Health Science Center in South Central Kansas. So let me go through the breakdown of how this is going to be allocated. So the first, and this is all going to be administered with the exception of the KU WSU Health Science Center and the provision that Representative Francis, I think you'll probably want to elaborate on. That's going to be coming from the State Highway Fund because that's going to be in regards to transportation needs in regards to the Hillmar plant that's going in southwest Kansas and the dairies that are going to be impacting the transportation needs in southwest Kansas. So the first provision is going to be in regards to the World Cup. $10 million in fiscal year 2025 of ARPA money is going to be utilized through the Department of Commerce in regards to the World Cup. And that is why I also made the question when Catherine Holland was here on Tuesday about having legislative members serving on subcommittees in regards to how that money is going to be spent in the state of Kansas. So that is going to be one provision, is that we're going to have $10 million allocated in fiscal year 2025. The remaining $18 million that was actually passed by Chairman Corbett's committee in regards to the Department of Commerce would be in 2026. So it will be still the cumulative total of $28 million going to the World Cup with legislative oversight on subcommittees in regards to KC 2026. The second provision is going to be $30 million. I don't know if that person was actually not happy with what I just said or what exactly happened. The other is going to be $30 million in regards to the KU Wichita State Health Science Center in South Central Kansas. In the governor's budget, because of some things that occurred last year, $30 million was allocated towards each institution by the state general fund. We are not going to be rolling that back as what is proposed in the governor's budget. We'll leave the $30 million SGF that was allocated last year and give them an additional $30 million of the ARPA funds for the Health Science Center, which, Dylan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe when we had the Legislative Budget Committee meeting, that would be a total of $190 million, pretty much, towards this project that is supposed to cost around $305 million in South Central Kansas. The next item would be the discussion that we had in regards to the Northwest Kansas project that we had a discussion on Tuesday. This is going to be broken up. So you have, if you recall on that discussion, we had housing, but we also had retail development. So the retail development part of that is $9,250,000. This will be administered through the Department of Commerce following all the parameters that they have in regards to all economic development packages that they administer through that particular department. That $9,250,000 is going to be coming from the American Rescue Plan Act money that we still have remaining. The $7,250,000 in regards to housing, which includes the housing cooperative that we have with the Dane G. Hansen Foundation, which has a footprint of 26 counties in northwest Kansas. So that $7,250,000 will actually come from the rural housing money that we allocated to the Kansas Housing Corporation in 2022. And that money has not been utilized at all. So we're going to pull $7,250,000 out of that fund to address the housing needs in northwest Kansas. The $4 million, and Representative Hoffman, when I open this up for discussion, can discuss this, it would go to those 3 communities that I mentioned earlier in south central Kansas that are actually being, I would say, shut off from gas service. And those communities do not have the resources to allocate funds to restore that or have the ability to find other means of heating or whatever the case may be. That is going to be coming from the American Rescue Plan Act money that we have remaining. The $6 million, and Representative Francis can elaborate on this as well, would be coming for those transportation needs that I talked about in regards to Hillmar coming into southwest Kansas, and then those transportation needs in the dairies that will be impacting the transportation needs in southwest Kansas. That will be coming from the state highway fund. The only area of the state that I would say is probably omitted from this, but we actually did this in action, and I would probably throw in that the $40 million for the new KBI building in Pittsburgh would be benefiting not only the state of Kansas, but also the southeast portion of the state of Kansas. So holistically, this is to address areas of concern and need through the entire state of Kansas in respect to the World Cup in northeast Kansas. I can justify going home and telling my constituents that I did everything that I possibly could in addressing needs in not only the World Cup in northeast Kansas, but also areas of concerns all over the state of Kansas. So that is my motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Francis. Discussion on the motion. Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we might be putting the cart in front of the horse just a little bit here. I'm still not convinced on premise number 1, and that is that $28 million helps northeast Kansas. And so to then take the step that, well, because it might, and I could go home, by the way, and very easily defend throwing that $28 million back into the, back into debt, anything other than soccer. That would be defended very easily in my district anyway. But to then take the step that because we're spending, or allegedly spending $28 million in northeast Kansas, that means we should spend $85 million. I have a tough time with that.
Again, I would also preface, this is not state general fund dollars. This is ARPA that we have remaining. And the $10 million, well, actually, ARPA funds cannot be used for debt reduction. So it has to be used by parameters by the federal government when we receive that money. This is the amount of money that is still remaining that and I would probably agree with you in context that we don't spend it, then it goes back to the federal government, which, I'm fine with that. However, we do have requests that are out there. And so my intention is to have the ARPA funds utilized with the World Cup, with the Northwest Project, and then having other funds that we have without the state of Kansas. So we're not just addressing one part of the state, we're addressing all parts of the state.
Well, I hope some of the other projects have more of an impact than I predict for northeast Kansas will have.
And also, I would also preface, this also gives the House a conferenceable item. The Senate has many other items. I won't go into what the Senate has actually put in there, but this actually gives us a position in conference as well. Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know what the right number on any of these things are going to be. So, you know, if we want to argue whether it's 20 million or 28 million, I think those are all valid discussions. I don't think we're going to know what the numbers are until we're actually done. But I think when we talk about the World Cup is going to happen. And there are communities in the Kansas City metro area that are going to have to provide security. They're going to have to provide transportation. I mean, it's just a fact. It's going to happen. And so I think an allocation there is very important. And I agree with the chairman that when we're making a massive investment, oh, and by the way, if the World Cup doesn't go off well, it's a blemish on the state of Kansas because it's Kansas City. It's not Missouri City. So it's important for us to make sure that the event goes off well. I just want to talk just real briefly about the $6 million because I agree with the chairman. It makes it easier if it's part of a package that I can go home to. But in Southwest Kansas, we think the Hillmar Dairy is a wonderful project. But the fact of the matter is it impacts all of Southwest Kansas. And when you think about it, the funding that the state provides to our local counties for road improvements, it's kind of been a problem for a while because they get a portion of the state gas tax. And that has been relatively flat because of increasing mile per gallon of our vehicles, more alternative fuel vehicles. So the funding that they've got from the state on a regular basis has not kept up with inflation. One of the things that allows the state to keep up with inflation is the portion of the sales tax that we allocate towards that. So because of that, because of these dairies and more heavy trucks on those roads, you know, we've got a lot of counties out there struggling to maintain the infrastructure they already have. I just wanted to add on to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions, but my first one is for you, Mr. Chair. And so when we're talking about the $10 million of ARPA funds for 2025, are we also committing to how the distribution of the remaining 18 million is going to be done at this time, or is that at a later date?
I probably should have elaborated on what's going to happen with the remaining 18 million in 2026, but I would also say that's also subjective because we're going to be looking back and seeing if there's going to be any recouping of money from the ARPA funds and see if that could be utilized in regards to the remaining 18 million in 2026. There's also the attracting a professional sports fund that we have when we passed the sports betting bill, and I would say if I was a betting man, no pun intended, that the vote on April 3rd in regards to Jackson County in Missouri, I would probably say the voters are going to approve the new stadium for the Royals to be built in downtown Kansas City and the improvements to be made in Arrowhead. And the reason why I say that is because we just had the Kansas City Chiefs win the Super Bowl. And the state of Missouri is not going to want to have an NFL franchise leave the state of Missouri like the St. Louis Rams did. So they're going to do everything they possibly can to keep those two major league professional teams in the state of Missouri, and I really don't see the utilization of the fund that we had established with the sports betting to lure one of those over to the Kansas side. I am guessing that that's going to pass on April 3rd. We'll see what happens, and obviously if it doesn't, then that's something we can discuss when we come back on April 25th when we discuss omnibus items. So that fund is just sitting there. And we could possibly use that for the World Cup as well, and then we could see what the balance is at that time when we're doing the budget for fiscal year 2026. Yes, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, and so that's probably around, what, 7 million?
The projection right now is about $7.5 million in fiscal year 2026. Right now it's nearing around $5 million.
Okay, and so would it be something that we could add proviso language that we have grant dollars that correlate with the request for security and transportation, that we're able to maintain those dollars and pass those grants directly to those agencies. And at the same time, Kansas City 2026 gets the full credit because we're going to be paying for those Kansas security items. Is that something that we can add if this committee desired to do so?
I am perfectly fine with that. And as I mentioned in my motion, the intent is to have legislative members on the subcommittees for KC 2026 so we know where the money is going. But I'm perfectly fine with adding that language.
Would that be, so if we were to vote on your motion, which is pretty expansive, but if we were to vote on that motion, then we could then follow with another motion that specified, or would that be at a later date?
I would say later date.
Okay. And then my second question
Yes.
is for your vice chair. On these communities that do not, or were shut off from gas, can you give more information? Because I definitely understand it, but that's not economic development, that's sustainability. And I wonder what partnerships we could have with One Gas and others to make that a reality. I don't know the full extent of it, but all I can say is it's very specific to, you said 3 communities, and I'm thinking about just even my communities that I represent that are having devastating issues with water in 2 different ways that are highly detrimental, and there's no resource for them. There's no outlet. We've looked for everything. And so I'm just kind of trying to understand, they also are hitting a wall, but so are other communities in different ways. So I'm struggling with that.
Representative Hoffman.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, and I was going to go into explaining a little bit more. What this is, and we've done research to make sure there are only 3 communities in the state that are in this situation. But these communities are very small. We're talking, 200 people, around there. They're in 2 different counties, and they have been being fed by a distribution field, basically. So a gas field has been feeding them for several years. So that gas field is now declining. The pressures are not where they used to be. So the companies are saying, we are not going to be able to continue to provide gas for these communities. When that happens, they will not have the ability to bring in gas because they are not hooked up to any sort of system. They're not hooked up to Black Hills or Kansas Gas Service. They're about 10 miles, most of them are around 10 miles away from the line. So what we've done is we've looked, what this would be is it would be a grant that would go to the KCC. KCC would administer the grant to these different communities to go out and do an RFP to build the line. The lines would be built by either Kansas Gas or Black Hills, whoever wins the RFP bid. They would then be responsible for feeding the gas to the communities. These communities have municipal-owned utilities, so they're municipal-owned gas utilities. As part of this, those communities would also have to do a cost rate study and to make sure that their rates are where they need to be in order to maintain their facilities once this is all done. So I don't want to have to come back later and they say, well, you built us this line, but we can't afford to keep the going. So they would have to do a cost rate study. So that would be their part in it. Without this, they're literally not going to have any way to, because there is no way that these communities would be able to pay for a line being brought into their community. And, so I think it's very important that we try to do something for them.
Representative Williams.
Okay, so thank you for that explanation. So how many total people are we talking about in these 3 communities?
Representative Hoffman.
Probably around less than 1,000, probably somewhere in there.
1,000.
Representative Williams.
Thank you. I was going to call you president for a moment. I'm sorry.
I don't like it, but
Getting a little ahead of ourselves.
Right. Okay, so, but I'm thinking about this, but usually with your utilities, you take out municipal bonds, at least there's some skin in the bank game, and I mean, their rates, I mean, is there going to be maybe an additional fee to, the only skin in the game that I'm hearing from is they've got to do a cost study, and I just feel like there should be, everything we do is always a match. And again, I'm thinking of in my own community where they don't have access to water, they would have to build their own line. It's a very similar thing, except water is more important than gas. There are other ways to heat your home. And so that's my struggle, is that do they have a skin in the game? And why do we not have a match with this? Because it is going to, municipal bonds, those types of fees, they can, they can take over a long period of time.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the rate study, I'm almost positive is probably going to come back and say, hey, you're going to have to raise your rates a little bit. The reality is in order for them to be able to build these lines, you're talking $60 per month for 10 years for every customer in those little towns. So if you think that that's fair to add $60 to their bill so that they can have gas service, then I guess that's what we do. But they have no ability to be able to pay for this, because they could take out municipal bonds, but their rates are going to go up $60 a month, and it'll just kill them. So thank you.
Representative Williams.
Okay, I definitely not going to argue the merits of these different items, just saying that I've got constituents that have oil in their water and that would need a line, a rural water line in order to get that, and they have no resource, they have nothing, and we're doing this. And so I just see a little disparity in that, and it's just a comment more than anything.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And one thing I'll say is that we did look at build money for this. The infrastructure law that was passed by the problem is that this is new. This is building out new. There is money for upgrading, changing infrastructure. I think probably that most likely what you're talking about, they could probably apply to the feds for some build money, because that would be an upgrade in their existing infrastructure. There is nothing in anywhere that we've been able to find that allows for this new build out. It just like the feds wouldn't allow that money to be used for debt reduction, they're not allowing it to be new build out either. So I think that's the difference between what you're talking about and what this is.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've talked kind of vaguely. What communities are these?
Representative Hoffman.
What communities are these?
It's Hartner, Sawyer, and Sharon.
Okay, Mr.
Representative
Chairman.
Rogers.
Thank you. As I think the previous representative spoke, I mean, there are other sources, propane, other means for heating and gas service of some sort. Mr. Chairman, but to kind of take from a colleague from Sedgwick, this is really this can be a global discussion. I represent many small communities as well, under 100, under 300. We have these, we're battling to try to get money for internet service. We're battling money for water. We've had those conversations of communities that don't have water. It's kind of like we don't like government till we need government, and then we try to find solutions. I think you're right. I think by the time we spend $4 million, we're not going to be further ahead. I understand the situation in around the El Dorado area in Augusta, and that situation with water, and without water we have nothing. So, I guess, and not to derail everything, but this is a discussion, and I've had with colleagues already, is those of us that do represent very small communities. In this building, one of my largest communities would be considered a small community, but we have communities of people with 60 and 80, and we don't have stoplights, and we have gravel for our main street. And what do we do, not necessarily as the legislature, but what do we do for those communities? Whether it was a school, a bank, grocery store, whatever. And what is the role, and does the state have a role in those? And so as we start down this road, what's it to be next year? One of my communities desperately needs infrastructure for water. And so how are we going to do that? And do we, you know, some people have foundations that are able to kind of help a little bit. I understand their plot, but I don't know if it would work. I think the one thing, Mr. Chairman, I will not digress anymore, but I think as we look, this may be an interesting case study as we move forward, dealing in what's going to be the future of these really frontier or micro communities, whatever word you want to say. So again, I guess that's my 2 bits on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Kincaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at the risk of repeating, I'll just say that I really, I'm always supportive of equalizing across the state, and I'm very sympathetic to the issue that we're discussing with gas. But I'll add that this is a dangerous road to go down, because I've got a community of 300 people in Saline County that you might recall back in January, I brought up that they were without water during that, what do you call that, polar cold weather. And that brought to light, they did get water after that, but they were being provided water from a private well, and it brought to light that there were a lot of quality issues, there were pressure issues, and just unprofessionalism by the person that ran that. And it will cost them $5 million, we keep talking about millions of dollars, $5,000 for each of those homes to hook up to the rural water district, which is actually what they need to do. So, yeah, I'm working on that issue as well. And, you know, North Central's not really a focus in your regions that you're reaching out to in the rural areas. So maybe I do need to add that in. I'm just kidding. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Any further discussion? Representative Helgerson.
Mr. Chairman, you started the discussion by saying you had a conversation with the governor. Can you tell us more how the governor received this? Is there going to be a GBA?
I have not only had discussions with the governor, but I've also had discussions with the Secretary of Commerce and Lieutenant Governor. And the Lieutenant Governor has met with the individuals and those community partners in regards to specifically with the Northwest Kansas project. The governor seemed very supportive, and she even asked me the question of whether or not she should submit a GBA in regards to this item, and I told her no. I said I want to do this in committee.
Okay. Second part of that.
Yes.
You mentioned that part of the project is to have additional housing. What type of housing?
That was in the presentation that they had on Tuesday. So it was an array of single-family homes. It was also senior housing. It was just kind of different in regards to the communities that was actually asking for housing dollars. And
since they were not able to bring prospective builders into some of the areas, has it been thought about how you'll be able to get the builders into that area? Because there's a surplus of funds because nobody would take on the advantage. Am I hearing? I would say you're probably incorrect on that. There are builders out there, and this would be administered through the Department of Commerce with the money that's coming from the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation in regards to building, but there's no problem trying to get builders out there. Okay. And that's coming from somebody who lives in that area. All right. I was told, though, that there was a surplus of funds there and that you tapped into it. Because
Yes, in regards to the Kansas Housing Resource Center, but I would contend that they've never seen this influx of money that we put in the budget in 2022, and they don't know how to handle it. And we have housing needs out there in rural parts of the state, and they're not utilizing it. So that's why we're pulling the money back, and we're saying, here, these are actually projects that are of demand, and we're going to be utilizing those funds that we allocated 2 years ago.
Okay. The ARPA funds, you have taken all of the funds. Did you take the interest off of those funds?
No. And we have not actually utilized the fund, and I was going to use that in my close. So of the $76.5 million that's remaining in ARPA, the amount of this that would be utilized would be $73,250,000. So that still leaves $3,250,000 in ARPA.
With or without the interest?
Without.
Without the interest. I'll leave the rest of my remarks. I do have some concerns about the sports betting and the additional use of the ARPA funds, and I hope we have a discussion on that early.
And that will be a discussion. As you know, the House will be the lead in Legislative Budget Committee when we have the interim. And so you'll be a part of that. And we'll probably have discussions in regards to the remaining amount for 2026. Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, I hope I'm not speaking, I don't know that I've thought this through all the way. But, you know, I've heard Representative Williams and Representative Kincannon talk about some of the water issues in the state. And I know myself and Representative Hoffman and Chairman Waymaster are on the Build Kansas program that has access to a lot of federal grants for communities. But I know also yesterday I spoke with the Economic Lifelines and that there's problems for communities to access those grants. And it really comes more from a organizational expertise of those communities. They really can't access those funds because they don't know how to. They don't have the resources to administer those funds once they get them. So, you know, I think one of the things we might consider at some time is an interim committee where we talk to the different agencies in the state about what kind of infrastructure could we provide at the state to help that community or that rural area access those water funds. And I'm sorry I'm digressing from the original deal, but sometimes we've got money out there and we just don't get to it. So thank you for indulging me.
Any further discussion on the motion? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one comment. I mean, I think that the things that are in this package sound great. I just want to note that I am in agreement that maybe we need another motion at another time that is a more global response to some of these emergency issues when they don't have access. Because some of the issues that I'm talking about, we have had people from every department look at it, whether it's the KCC or KDHE or the governor's office, and hit a wall. And so there are emergency situations where there's not another resort. And that's kind of what I'm hearing in this situation, but that doesn't address other situations. So, Mr. Chair, I might bring a motion if we're here tomorrow on that topic. Thank you.
Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, I close on my motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. Representative Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was an item on the goldenrod sheet that was put off to omnibus for Fort Hays State University. That is line item number 20. So there was a request for some more information, and I will own not providing that information during my report out. I should have had that, and that's my fault. So Fort Hays State University's Western Kansas Nursing project there, the question was, are they turning students away? And the answer is yes. This past fall, they've turned 25 students away. And I'll say they were turned away but put on a waiting list to gain admittance to the program. They anticipate large growth in this area for their BSN program. They're the only public university in Western Kansas that offer the BSN program. They have over a 93% graduation rate. And they also signed a agreement with 15 Kansas community colleges that have a nursing program. So if you graduate from one of those 15 nursing programs, you can automatically gain admittance to Fort Hays State University, and you don't have to reapply. So there's a great partnership in place. It's a priority program for those two technical colleges, North Central Tech and Northwest Tech, that recently affiliated with Fort Hays State University as well. So, Mr. Chair, I would move that we reconsider the $15 million SGF for Fort Hays State University, Western Kansas, or Western Nursing Development Facility improvements for classrooms and lab spaces for fiscal year 25.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Woodard. Discussion on the motion. Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I kind of thought about this, I think there's a lot of interconnectivity. We've had a lot of discussion about the contract nursing crisis, where our state hospitals have gone from $6 million a year in contract staffing 5 years ago to $60 million this last year. And that is because of the available workforce out there. And a lot of the problem is in Western Kansas. So I think if we can fill the pipelines with these nursing graduates, I think this problem eventually resolves itself. That's not to say we don't need to study it, but I do think this is a good motion.
Representative Williams.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. On that, if we're funding these slot increases, which that ultimately will do, give us more nurses, then it seems like that there should be proviso language that says those graduates funded through the expansion of state dollars shall not enter into contract nursing contracts.
Jill, that's a lot.
All right. Well, they like it. They like it. Is it possible can we get a comment on the feasibility and?
Representative Ballard.
Even though I looked at you and said, whoa, yes. But in terms of how much they charge, I'm not sure we can put that in there. Well, if you were talking about free enterprise, I don't think you can.
It's not free.
Yes, but I just want to put my plug in for it. I mentioned this before. The western portion does not have as many training facilities out there for the nursing. And I had someone call me about that, saying that they've had to turn people away because they don't have enough slots. So I would hope we would pass it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, could you do it for 4 or 5 years? I mean, I don't think it can be indeterminate, but I mean, but to go back to the original deal, I know my community college has a nursing program, and it's always full. So this will help us have more APRNs across the state, and more instructors across the state. So I think this is a great project to relieve the nursing shortage in Kansas.
Representative Kincannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't repeat. I agree with all of the previous speakers about the necessity, but I just want to go back to Representative Williams' suggestion. I mean, when we offer medical scholarships, we ask them to live in a certain area of the state. So I don't know how this would be much different. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Helgerson.
Well, if you may remember, I'm the one that pulled the money out for the hospital earlier. And in visiting with the chairman, this will be an omnibus issue to talk about prior to omnibus. I'm in the contract. I'm in concert with you about putting some limitations. But I've had some further discussion with whether or not we could put a clamp on these going to the state hospitals. Bottom line is some of the nurses need to be trained and go to doctor's offices and hospitals and other places out there and don't want to go to a psychiatric hospital. I think it's one thing that should be looked at, but that should, if that proviso is added, we do it in later on for the omnibus after we have some discussion, but we go ahead and fund this expansion of the nursing program now, so it's underway, and then we look at how we can do maybe more of a comprehensive plan.
Representative Williams.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's kind of what we were talking about. And perhaps if KLRD could provide us the number of scholarships we have for nursing in the state of Kansas and go that avenue, and if there are any other dollars that are directly attributable to expansion of state aid monies for programs, and if there is any potential link between those students that have that additional benefit or subsidy. Thank you.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. The other day I had to step out when this was being discussed, and I would have defended it hopefully a little stronger if I would have been here. I represent a large portion of Fort Hays employees, students, and so on in my district. And not to belabor the fact, but I think in some of our conversations we're getting away from the core of this. While I understand, and I think one of the reasons why we've seen a big push for nurses is because of this whole situation with contract nursing. They see the salaries. This is getting folks excited. Not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody wants to travel. So that's for another discussion if we want to get into that. This is a situation where this nursing program is one of the premier ones in the state, regardless of the location of where it is, whether it be west of here, east of here, south of here. This is a good investment. This is a good economic development investment. The leadership that Fort Hays has shown in working with our community colleges as well to feed into those that want to get advanced degrees in nursing. To me, this is one of the biggest no-brainers. The investments that this legislature is making this year in healthcare, this, I believe, will be another key component as we look at building healthcare within the state. So I strongly support this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was really just going back to the trying to place a limitation upon the graduates of these programs as to where or how they can work. And I think the funding going to the university would make that very difficult. If they were scholarships, as was alluded to, that'd make it a whole lot easier. The only way I can envision doing it through the university itself would be to say that these dollars pay for X number of slots of like a nursing expansion program, and nursing expansion recipients or students have XYZ limitations upon them. I think that's technically doable, but I'm not 100% sure Fort Hays is going to be really excited about that sort of a limitation placed upon their students or upon their funding. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion in regards to Representative Howe's motion? Seeing none, Representative Howe.
Mr. Chairman, I close on my motion.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. Back on the budget. Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. I have an amendment here for KDADS. I'd like to move and add 13.3 million SGF, 34.5 million all funds to the KDADS budget to increase slots for the IDD waiver by 500. With this motion, we'd be creating a total of 1,000 new slots on the IDD waiver, and they always say that we don't have the slots available. There's nobody there to take care of the problem. Maybe if this was out there, maybe they'd find a way to take care of them.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Tarwater. Discussion on the motion. Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I was actually making a motion to second that motion.
Representative Mason.
Thank you. Just, and to clarify, Chairman Corbett, you're doubling what we've done. We had 250 with the GBA and 250 for the social services budget for a total of 500. You're wanting to add an additional 500?
Representative Corbett.
Correct, Chairman.
Representative Mason.
While I agree with that in principle and sympathetically, I just think it's impractical at this point. Many of the items that we added this year for social services budget was raising the waivers and things like that to build capacity. Theoretically, I'd love to get rid of all the waiting lists immediately, but we wouldn't have the capacity to do that. And I think the 500 where we are is appropriate for this point.
And I would agree with Representative Mason. Any further discussion in regards to the motion? Representative Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, if we were to do away with the waiting list in its entirety, that's true. The capacity is not there. But an increase would actually have an impact. I think 500,000 that we have in there now will kind of keep it status quo. 500,000. Okay. I'm going to support the motion because I believe that this will, it has shown in the past when we have invested more in it that those providers, there are providers that are there. And I think that this is a way to have an impact on the waiting list. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think part of the issue is the IDD waiting list is unique. When you look at all of our HCBS waivers that we have out there, there's a lot of complexity that goes to that. It's not just a matter of we put X number of people out here on a waiting list. The services vary, the way that we do the program varies, and I didn't pull my notes out of my pad, but if you remember yesterday, the discussion about Kansas looking at, and Representative Mason can correct me if I'm wrong, but Kansas looking at what Missouri has done to be able to remove, get some of their people off of the waiting list, provide a certain amount of services, and then I think it was changing, was it the housing representative?
The housing.
The presentation that we had yesterday. Yeah, the community support waiver. So that's why I think that this motion is probably not good at this time, because we need to let that part take and work and see how that changes that waiting list, and then we may be able to expedite getting more individuals off of the waiting list. And a lot of people are on that waiting list because they sign up before they actually need the services, and that also has to be separated out. So I would oppose the motion.
Any further discussion in regards to the motion? Representative Helgerson.
You know, part of my job now is to take what the minority party thinks they should do and listen to some of the interest groups. So, you know, this was one of the items that was listed and said, Helgerson, be sure you get this added, and they're working the Republican side. I gotta ask the question though, where's the money all coming from? What are we up, 150, $200 million that we've added? I don't know. I've lost track. Somewhere, you know, maybe it's conference committee, maybe it's a floor amendment by somebody that puts a little bit more, pointing at me, puts a little bit more reality as to how much we're trying to budget these things. We can't all, I know I'm supposed to shut up. We can't always add. Maybe we have to go back and say, you know, maybe we have to look within the agency and say what the priorities are. You know, if we add it here or if we add it later or have the conversation with the Senate, or I'm just posing the question. There is a limit somewhere. And I'll shut up now.
That being said, is there any further discussion in regards to the motion? Seeing none, Representative Corbett, you may close.
Thank you, Chairman. It's kind of like build it and they'll come. I think it's a good stab at this, and I'd ask for your support. I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The noes appear to have it. Noes do have it, motion fails. We're back on the budget. Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On item 10 in KDADS, I had made the motion to remove the $5 million funding, and I think it was to consider that maybe at omnibus. But anyway, the point is, I want to add back in the $5 million because what I learned after that meeting is the 14C is actually going away, and this will give them a time in order to get themselves adjusted so that they all right-size themselves, and hopefully we don't have any problems with it going forward as it phases out. So that would be my motion, add the $5 million.
All right, committee, heard the motion, seconded by Representative Ballard. Discussion on the motion. Representative Owens.
Can you just refresh my memory on what the 14C setting is and the 14C program process?
Representative Landwehr.
Okay, let's look here.
23 companies.
Go ahead. Let's do it. Mr. Chairman, is that all right for Representative Mason?
That is perfectly fine. Representative Mason.
Yes, the 214C waiver is issued by the U.S. Department of Labor, and it allows substandard or sub-minimum wage in a like a sheltered workshop where they can pay piecework, that type of thing. Like if somebody's job is to put wing nuts on a spindle and they can do 3 per hour or 20 per hour, they get paid per piece. Oftentimes it ends up being less than minimum wage. The 214C waiver is falling out of favor nationwide, and it will be going away at some point. So I don't think the U.S. Department of Labor is going to allow that. That was what Senate Bill 15 had to do with. We were allowing a $1 million per year transfer to incentivize the sheltered workshops to get away from that. In talking with Interhab and other organizations, they believe that the $5 million can help those workshop settings pay minimum wage at least, and then part of that would be used to modernize equipment and make it more efficient to help their clients help themselves.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a question per se, just more of an observation. When universities want assistance in right-sizing, that's bad. When 14C companies want assistance in right-sizing, that's good. Welcome to government.
Any further discussion in regards to Representative Landwehr's motion? Seeing none, Representative Landwehr.
Well, and actually, Representative Sutton, right-sizing was the wrong terminology for me to use because, as you heard Representative Mason talk about, the 14C is going away, and currently it is these individuals make under minimum wage. This here will provide the increased wage to setting to be minimum wage and provide the funding to assist the providers to become more efficient and competitive in order to aid them in continuing workshop-based opportunities for the IDD folks. The feds are taking this away. This gives them the opportunity to start being able to adapt to that program going away. And then this will be one-time funding, period. But it's not about right-sizing. It's about a federal program being taken away. And we've got to take and help them ease into the next path for them to take. But this will be one-time funding. I would move my motion.
All right, committee, you heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes. Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we were talking a lot about nurses here just a little bit ago. Fun fact, you know that 34% of new nurses each year come from our independent colleges. 51% of the degrees awarded in law enforcement and homeland security come from our independent accredited colleges as well. So with that, I have a proviso if we could hand that out. I'll go on chatting while that's getting passed out. Our independent colleges do a remarkable amount for our state, yet receive just such a tiny amount of assistance from our state. Yeah, yes. And so to add a little bit of context while that's being put out, they provide a $1.1 billion annual economic impact to the state. Half of the students of our independent colleges actually come from out of state, and about 36% of those stay in the state after graduating. I happen to be one of those students, as does my wife. And so Yeah, as are even some additional people on this committee. What you guys are having handed out currently to you should also include this document here from the Kansas Board of Regents. And let me talk about my amendment while that's being handed out. What I'm talking about is the Kansas Comprehensive Grant and how we share that Kansas Comprehensive Grant. For some reason, for many years, and you'll see on this from 2017 to 2022, it was split 51-46-3 roughly. In 23, it was changed so that our independent colleges got even less of the small amount of benefit from the state of Kansas. In 24, it remained the same, and if you guys will recall, we came up just a few votes short of overriding the governor's veto last year. I'm not sure exactly what concerns the governor has with our independent colleges, but I can assure you their value is significant in the state of Kansas. And so I'm not asking for any additional SGF. I'm not asking for any additional funding. I'm simply asking that we go back to respecting our independent colleges and go back to 2022, where the private institutions receive 51%, the state universities receive 46%, and then Washburn University receives 3%. What this proviso does is it actually takes out $14 million of need-based aid. And you're saying, why in the world would I do that? Well, that's because I want the, as it says in A, the chief executive officer of the state board to come in front of the State Finance Council and confirm that it is being split the same way in 2022, and then they'll get that money back. So, to be clear, the proviso removes $14 million, but gives them a way to get that $14 million back by simply agreeing to split it at 2022 levels, and I move my motion.
All right, committee, is there a second on the motion? Seconded by Representative Kincannon. Discussion on the motion. Representative Woodard.
Mr. Chair, we've had a number of conversations about this, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but made some of these points last year on the floor when we, I believe, came up 8 votes shy, which is not close to an override. This proviso, Kansas loves being one of the worst in the country, and we're already one of the worst in the region when it comes to need-based aid, and so adding need-based aid is one of the things that's been a big priority for me, and luckily this committee and the Higher Ed Budget Committee over the years have been able to add funding over the last at least 6 years that I've been here. But this proviso, our independent colleges do a great service to the state, but they're private. And being private means that they're not subject to some of the same rules that our public institutions are. And while I'm glad that they make up 10% of the state share, half their students are from out of state. So this would say that we're going to give 51% of the Kansas Comprehensive Grant to about 5% of the students enrolled in the state, and that the 90% of the students at our public institutions only get the other half. If you're private, be private. I support need-based aid. I'm glad that we have the Kansas Comprehensive Grant that follows the students, whether they go to the public institutions or the independent institutions. But I just cannot justify giving half the funds, which means that they get much larger aid packages if they go to an independent college, if then we're able to give out to the 90% of the students that are at the public institutions. And so it will surprise no one, I think, that I'll oppose the motion. But I just, splitting half the money for such a small percentage of students does not seem fair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Estes.
Can you tell me how this might impact students who are in the pipeline and waiting to find out what their current awards might be?
Representative Owens.
This is for 2025, so it wouldn't have any impact.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative Owens, you may close.
I believe if my numbers are even roughly correct, our Board of Regents universities are getting additional $200 million this year. I think they're doing all right. And I think going back to where we provide at least somewhat and of a level support for our independent colleges, when we're talking about roughly 35 million that's already being split between regions and independents. Sorry, you guys are tired of hearing me.
You need to fix your mic there for a little bit.
All right. I know, but I won't anymore now. Long story short, I think you guys get it. We take care of our regent universities. Let's respect our independent colleges and get them back to a split that was sufficient for many, many, many years, that for some reason over the last 2 years has not been sufficient. I close and move my motion.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of amendments. The first one is, it would be actually on it'd be on the finalization of the brown sheet. It's number 15. And it would be, it'd be to add 1.4 million all funds, which is 1.2 million state money, for a family finding system for children in foster care. It would be a RFP would be put out to identify IT system that would allow easy tracking of the family finding data. So right now, DCF is in the middle of a major upgrade to their system. They call it CWIS, their CWIS project. And this particular RFP would have to be able to complement it and integrate with that system. But it would get them to a lot quicker be able to help these families and than the CWIS project. Now, this was in our budget last year. The governor vetoed it, and then I guess she got an epiphany and decided that she liked it all of a sudden, and so she put it at GBA, and so so anyway, it's GBA number 6, and so I would move that we add that.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Helgerson. Discussion on the motion. Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think in the GBA, it explains exactly what happened there. It said, "You're right, Kyle Hoffman." So I'm not sure what the confusion on that is. You know?
Any further discussion in regards to the motion? All right, seeing none, Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Representative Estes.
Thank you. I'd like to begin with a question, if you'll bear with me just a second. I wanted to make sure I phrased my question correctly. I wanted to be sure, because there's a little bit of confusion on whether or not the OBGYN global payment codes, which are fee for service, which is a little bit different payment, were included in the social services budget increase for Medicaid reimbursement. If staff could answer that question, please.
Megan.
You're asking about the OBGYN codes specifically? So I know that the OBGYN codes, some of them are not included in the physician fee schedule increase, and that's because they're reimbursed in a different system. They're reimbursed globally. So for instance, if someone goes in to deliver a baby, there's a global reimbursement for the delivery and the prenatal care as well as the postnatal care. So those were not included in the physician fee increase. I have reached out to the agency to find out if they were included in the outpatient hospital increase. My assumption is that they are not, but I need to confirm that.
Estes.
If they were not, I would like to make sure that they were included in the 15% global award, and I don't know and pediatrics. I don't know if we should come back at omnibus, or the chair feels that motion's appropriate at this time.
probably could come back in omnibus where we have more information on whether or not what amount is included, which amount is not included, and then have that discussion then.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Any further motions?
Yes, thank you. Would like to do a conceptual amendment, and I need probably a little technical help, Megan, on authorizing the codes for the sonogram, remote sonograms that we, devices and monitoring that we saw yesterday. And maybe, Mr. Chairman, you can help me word that appropriately.
Well, I would probably say after we had the presentation yesterday, and obviously there was only 3 states that have instituted this process. Obviously, it's probably going to be more in the future. And as I mentioned, that was something that was a topic of interest when I went to the Medicaid Leadership Academy. And so I would probably structure the motion as, adding language that the Kansas Department of Health and Environment can utilize and I was looking for the Medicaid code. I don't seem to have it in my paperwork, that they mentioned yesterday that could be utilized as far as the telehealth ultrasounds and remote non-stress. I would also probably put the condition on there that be reviewed by the Health and Human Services committees in the House and the Senate, and then have discussion in regards to the implementation of that particular procedure next year.
I agree and would make that my motion.
Okay. So is there a second?
This is out of my field
Seconded
of
by Representative
expertise.
Landwehr. Any discussion on the motion? How do you find it? Yeah. Yes. Implement the program. Well, and we were just clarifying the motion, and this is directing KDHE to implement the program and start it.
Absolutely. Being able to do things remotely makes a world of difference. And when my mother was passing away, it was so amazing to be able to not have to drag her out in winter and use remote things. And the fact that we can do this for expectant mothers, especially in rural areas, I think will really help to improve our birth rates and successful pregnancies.
Representative Landwehr.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I thought that we were going to have KDHE look at that so that we know what codes we're dealing with here in Kansas specifically, and what the costs might be to this. Because keep in mind, with the stress test, that is something that the pregnant mother can do at home and connect then with her physician wherever they are. The sonogram is technically not remote like we think of it. A healthcare provider has to travel out to the home with the sonogram basically on a tablet instead of the big machines that we see normally in our healthcare facilities. That's going to have a greater cost than what the other one would. And I think it would make more sense for us to have KDHE look at this, evaluate it, give us an estimated cost on this, look at what the other states have indeed done, make sure that we're dealing with the right codes. Because there's a lot of times that when we add things to Medicaid, they have a tendency to fall over into the private insurance industry, and then we're doing mandates. And then when you want to come in and you ask for a mandate, then we've got to take and go through the state employee plan to evaluate what the cost is on it. So it sounds simple and easy, but in my view that it's not. So I'd have to, if we can't change the proviso to do that, then I'd have to withdraw my second.
I would probably say, this is something that I think the state of Kansas needs to move forward on, and so I'm perfectly fine with your language of having the evaluation and the looking into whether or not we can institute this in the state of Kansas by KDHE, and then, obviously, as I mentioned, your committee would look at it and review it, and then next year we would look at, is that fine with the?
As the maker of the motion, I concur, and since you're the second, I think we're in good shape.
Just getting the ball rolling, I guess, is the best way to put it. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative Estes, you may close.
I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple more amendments. The first one, if you'll remember rightly, when we did the judiciary, I had said that there would be a possibility that we'd have to come back with more money to, for their credit monitoring. I met with them this morning, and I was actually pleasantly surprised because it wasn't near as much as I was afraid it was going to be. So I would move that we add $1 million to the judiciary budget for them to provide 1 year of credit monitoring to those that were impacted by their breach, and that would be in 2024.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Helgerson. Discussion on the motion, Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. $1 million really that's going to cover? Did they get a really good deal, or were there just a lot fewer people than were expected?
Yeah, it's actually just a little bit less than that. I'm giving them just a little bit of a cushion. I mean, that anything that they wouldn't use would come back. But yeah, I was very surprised. So that's what they're saying. It would cover it, and it would just provide for 1 year. Just that 1 year monitoring.
Representative Sutton.
Right. I hope that's the case. That's fantastic. A lot lower than I would have expected as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative Hoffman, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes. Representative Hoffman.
And then my last one that I have is when we did the state treasurer, I wasn't sure why this wasn't in there, but then realized that we needed to do some changes in it. So if you could pass out the proviso for the state treasurer. If you remember, last year we did the alternative to abortion program that was through the state treasurer. This would allocate $2 million for fiscal year 25 for that program. It renames the program to the Pregnancy Compassion Awareness Program, and it would continue statewide program previously known as abortion or alternatives to abortion. It would enhance and increase resources that promote childbirth instead of abortion to women facing unplanned pregnancies, and to offer a full range of services. The proviso is a little different than last year because the provider has already been they went through the RFP, so a provider has already been established, and this would just extend that program for another year. They have to come back with to us with their findings, what they've been doing. At this point, it's only been in effect for about 5 to 6 months, so they really don't have a lot to show us. But by next year, hopefully, they would. So with that, I would move my amendment.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Landwehr. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, Representative Hoffman, you may close.
I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Representative Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When the House Budget Committee on Ag and Natural Resources made their subcommittee report and recommendation to House Appropriations on line number 2, it says to delete the 8 million SGF and 3 FTE positions for the apprenticeship and business partnerships for fiscal year 25. Then the second sentence says, recommend the House Committee on Appropriations add $14.3 million to the Kansas Border Regents for this purpose. So we haven't taken action on that, so I would like to move that we add $14.3 million for the apprenticeship and business partnership for fiscal year 25 and move that under the Kansas Border Regents budget.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Carlin. Discussion on the motion. Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to be sure that we don't add it twice. We're just transferring the amount that we already have.
Representative Howe.
It's my understanding their recommendation was to add the 14.3 million, so it has not been added yet, is my understanding.
Representative Carlin.
Okay, thank you. I just want to be sure he didn't accidentally say it wrong. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll close on my motion.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. Discussion on the budget. Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was another item on the Goldenrod omnibus sheet that I'd like to bring up for consideration. It's item number 16. It says to review the deletion of 209,000 SGF and 2 FTE positions for KBOR support staff. I would move that we delete the 209,000 SGF and those 2 FTE support staff.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Woodard. Discussion on the motion. It is item 16 on the second page. Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Normally, I'm not usually supportive of deleting funding or FTEs, but since we made this recommendation, I haven't heard any sort of information or justification from Board of Regents why they would need this, so I can't justify voting for it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none, Representative Howe, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just I want to comment that on the goldenrod sheet, there is an item missing from the subcommittee report for the Kansas Board of Regents. On that for fiscal year 25, it was item number 5 on that sheet. It says delete 20 million SGF for the State Capital Renewal Fund for fiscal year 2025 and review it omnibus. So that was not, that might have been just overlooked and not included. So if KLRD staff could potentially add that back, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
And we'll probably have all the items that we made a motion to have discussed at omnibus when we come back on April 25th.
Okay.
To have that. So but Megan's going to make a note on that.
All right. Thank you.
Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I believe Jill's got a proviso for us. It was discovered yesterday that the BSRB board is making a change in they have a regulation that deals with social work students required to be in the classroom 50% of the time in order to get their degrees. There are schools of social work that are accredited and are operating at 100% the time online. And then the University of St. Mary's in Leavenworth is having a hard time getting their accreditation due to this regulation change. And I think that we need to, at this time, put a halt to this so that we can have a discussion and understand the ramifications of how much more difficult it will be for us to get some of our social workers out of our colleges. So no money.
All right, committee, you heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Hoffman. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, Representative Landwehr, you may close.
Close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Representative Landwehr, do you have any more? Representative Helgerson.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. House Bill 2613, there was a discussion earlier in the session about the DARE funding of $300,000, and that was originally proposed in the bill to be a demand transfer. I went to the mic and asked that it be used, that we use SGF dollars, and volunteered to put the $300,000 from into the budget bill. There was no opposition. The carriers of the bill agreed with it. So I'm trying to put the $300,000 into this mega bill.
Would you make the condition that if House Bill 2613 does not pass, that it lapses back to SGF?
Yes.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Woodard. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, Representative Helgerson, you may close.
Close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Representative Helgerson.
Second item I wanted to bring up. Many of you have heard about the contamination at the 29th and Grove site in Wichita. The governor had put $1 million into the program to begin testing of individuals that live in that area. The estimates that are now coming to us are approximately $7.5 million. And this is for testing. I am asking that the committee put in an additional $2.5 million for testing of the residents, and there are about 13,000 individuals that need to be tested for cancer. And then we may look at it again in omnibus to see if we have any more insights. The money would go to the Department of Health and Environment to be awarded in grants to local facilities in order to provide the cancer testing.
And this would be an additional $2.5 million or $2.5 million total?
$2.5 million. The estimate right now to do the full testing is over $7 million. I am just trying to get in half of it. And then at omnibus, I'll bring back more details and how it would be implemented and a little bit more information from the department.
All right. Committee, you've heard the motion. Seconded by Representative Estes. Discussion on the motion. So I just want to clarify your motion. This is $3.5 million total.
It's $3.5 million total. The committee has already recommended, or the governor recommended $1 million. I'm moving it up $2.5 million on top of that.
All right. Discussion on the motion. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Contamination, explain more about this contamination site. What was contaminated? Was it water? Is it something in the homes? Is it the land? What is it?
Representative Helgerson.
I think that that is a little bit up in the air. And I say that because trained, a Union Pacific has accepted, I think, part of the responsibility. There was an oil refinery that was in the area that may also have some of the responsibility. The reason to get on this is our agency may have known this for several years and did not communicate this contamination in the site.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So was this overseen by the KCC for contamination?
Representative Helgerson.
KDHE.
KDHE, and we haven't had any reports, and so now we're jumping on it.
Representative Helgerson.
That's part of why I said that I'll respond back in the omnibus so that I'll have a little bit more handout information or material for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Estes.
This is the chemical that is in the ground is very highly related to liver cancer. And the preliminary studies that have happened so far, there is a legitimate, very much higher than normal rate of liver cancer of residents living in this area. And there's a lot of other questions that we do have. So I concur that it's important to come back at omnibus, but at first look, this is something really serious that requires immediate action.
Representative Williams.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So it makes sense, but it also looks like a potential lawsuit for those individuals that live in that area. And so it's not Kansas that's going to hold the ultimate remedy. It would be, for example, Union Pacific or other determined entities.
There has been, sorry, Mr. Chairman, there has been legal action taken, and I think that's why we want to come back at omnibus with a better outline of the timeline, but it's a great big mess.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative Helgerson, you may close.
I'll close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes. Okay, committee, we are 5 minutes until we get on the floor, and so we are going to recess in regards to the budget. Actually, I think we progressed fairly well this morning in regards to the House position on our budget. And so I'm looking at the schedule for committees this afternoon and how many individuals serve on tax. So we do have a couple. So you have a hearing today in tax, but I know Ag is not meeting. You are meeting, okay. And they meet in this room, so we would not be able to do that. So that's at 3:30. So if it's okay with the will of the committee, since we progressed quite well this morning, I would probably say we're going to be in recess until 5 p.m. this evening. And then we'll work up the details of the budget. And that way we don't have to be here tomorrow morning. So until then, we are in recess until 5 p.m.